Chess YouTube, what is happening? Now in this position right here on move 5, Magnus Carlsen, he can do whatever he wants. He's playing a King's Indian attack versus the man, the myth, the legend, Daniel Naroditsky, the speed demon himself in the flesh. And in this position, Magnus, he can go, for example, bishop g2, short castles, standard stuff. But oh no, in this Titled Tuesday Blitz game, Magnus here on move 5, he busts out the Alpha Zero attack h4, intending h5 on the very next move. Chess YouTube, are you not entertained? All right, in the game, Magnus, you're playing as white, opens 1e4, and black plays 1d6, heading for the French defense. All right, Magnus here, 2d3 is the move, and black does go 2c5, and we do have a transposition to a Sicilian defense on the board. From here, Magnus, we have knight f3, black, knight c6, g3 and g6, and so far everything is super standard. White is likely going to go bishop g2 and short castles, black bishop g7, knight g to e7 and castles kingside and so on, and we'll have a very typical closed Sicilian game. Now instead of that, in this position on move 5, Magnus Carlsen, he reaches deep into his hat of tricks and he busts out the unthinkable idea of h4, expanding on the king side, threatening h5, kickstarting the Alpha Zero attack as early as move 5 in this game. Now Daniel, if he was smart, if he was sagacious enough, he would play the move here, knight to f6, guarding h5, stopping the pawn dead in its tracks. If white went h5, black could take the pawn with that knight. Now instead of that, in this position, Daniel, curiously enough, he plays the move bishop g7, which is literally poking the Norwegian bear, just telling Magnus, go ahead, I triple dog dare you, play the move h5, I want to see it, let's go baby. And Magnus, he does not decline the offer. He plays the move h5, kickstarting the Alpha Zero attack on the king side. It's going to be an intense game from here. All right, Daniel, he understands in chess, the best way to meet a flank attack is with a counterattack in the center of the board, and he does play the move here, d5, expanding in the center. From here, Magnus, the move is queen to e2. The idea being, if he does nothing, if he goes, say, bishop g2, black can take on e4, white takes back, and the queens do come off the board, and that is certainly to black's benefit, as he is the one under attack. Instead, Magnus here, queen to e2, finds the key idea, keeping the queens on the board. If black takes on e4, white takes back, and the queens do not come off. The queens remain on the board for now. From here, black takes on h5, g takes h5 is the move, opening up the h file, and white takes back with the rook. Rook takes h5. From here, Daniel plays the very logical idea of knight to f6, pressuring that rook on h5. Now, in this position, you are the greatest player of all time. You are literally Magnus Carlsen. Do you go back with the rook back to say h1, a logical idea? The rook's very active on the open h file. No, you do not. In this position, as the GOAT, you play the move rook to g5, because why the heck not? Let's attack the bishop, put our rook on an absurd square, and threaten the bishop on g7 and the castle king if it is castle king side. Magnus here, busting out all the stops to blow Daniel off the board, but Daniel, he's down but not out. In this position, he plays the move here, bishop to h6, hitting the rook on g5. But there's just one problem with this move. It looks very logical. You threaten the rook. You you pin the rook and the bishop on c1. If the rook moves to, say, h5, you lose the bishop on the c1 square. That is the idea. But in this position, Magnus, he did not play rook g5 with the intention of losing a piece. Oh no, when he played rook g5, he knew it was a one-way track. That rook is all in. It's going to stay on g5. And Magnus here, he takes on d5. E takes d5, a truly brilliant idea. And what is the point? Here, black has the option of capturing on g5 if he wants to. The rook is literally hanging, but the problem is, if you take that rook, white takes back, and white has so much pressure. The pawn on e6 is pinned to the king on the e8 square. You cannot take, it's not a legal move. But if you take with the knight, you lose the queen. And if you take with here the queen, you lose the knight. Everything is overloaded, and everything in the white position is synergizing absolutely perfectly. All right, In this position, Daniel, he does not capture on g5, at least not yet. Instead, the move is simply knight d4, jumping in with that knight, pressuring the queen and the vulnerable knight on the f3 square. From here, Magnus, he takes on d4. Knight takes d4 is the move. Black takes back, and then bishop g2, developing and once again ignoring the rook. Obviously, if you move the rook now anywhere, you lose, you lose everything. The bishop on c1 and so on, and the game is effectively over. Instead, the rook remains on g5 for now, and bishop g2 is the move for the goat. Black here, knight to e4. What are we even looking at? The knight jumping in, suiciding itself on the e4 square, but opening up the discovered attack on the rook on g5 with the queen. Magnus here, he takes the free knight. Queen takes e4 is the move, and black finally takes on g5. Bishop takes g5 is the response from black. Magnus here, queen takes d4, winning again a free pawn, and this time threatening the hanging rook on the h8 square. Black here, bishop f6 defends for now, and Magnus queen to e3. Now again, Magnus here has the raging attack on the e file. The pawn on e6 is pinned to the king, and the pawn on d5 is supported by the bishop on g2, meaning black here cannot take on d5 either legally or just from a common sense standpoint. You can't lose the queen for the bishop. Don't do that. All right. Daniel here. Short castles is the move. The king sort of being okay on the king side, sort of, but sort of not really at the same time. Black here missing the very important g pawn, and that pawn is so important for the defense of the king side. Without that pawn, everything is so vulnerable here. All right, Magnus, knight c3, jumps in with that knight, supports d5. Black here takes on d5, and white takes back, e takes, and knight takes d5. And now the bishop on f6 is vulnerable. Now, very importantly, the queen and the king are both lined up on the open e file. But the problem is, if black here plays rook to e8, you lose the game on the spot. Knight takes f6, check, hits the king and the rook. And if you take the knight, you lose the rook. Therefore, way back here, instead, bishop g7 is the move, which now renews the threat of rook to e8, pinning the queen to the king on the e1 square. White cannot allow that to happen. Therefore, the move here is king to f1, sliding off the open e file. Black, rook e8 happens all the same, hits the queen on the e3 square. Queen to f3, the queen slides over, and now bishop e6 hits that knight on d5 with yet another piece. Magnus here, knight to f4, retreats, hits the bishop. Queen to a5 is the move, sliding out with the queen and setting up all kinds of ideas on the e file with the rook and the queen either directly or indirectly controlling the e1 square. Magnus, he sees this and he ignores it and plays the move queen to h5, attacking h7, attacking f7, and very importantly, attacking the queen with his own queen supported by the knight on f4. Black here has the option of trading queens. Does he want to do that? It turns out that is a playable idea. Both sides here have about even material, so taking on h5 is playable, but instead, Daniel, he shows he is truly ready to play on and play for a win as black in this Title Tuesday Blitz game. He plays the move bishop to f5, blocking the attack on the queen on the a5 square and keeping the game going. From here, white, the move is bishop to e4, jumping up with the bishop. Black, rook to e5, setting up attacks on the queen on h5 with the rook on the e5 square. From here, bishop d2 hits the queen on a5, and very importantly, can black just win the bishop on d2 outright with that move? Well, as usual, the answer is it depends. Yes, you can win that bishop. The problem, though, is you lose control of f5. If you take the bishop on d2, queen takes d2, then bishop takes f5, hits the pawn on the h7 square, and white is crushing. Instead here, bishop takes e4, chosen in the game, and this, it turns out, is a massive blunder. Here, in this position, Magnus, his queen's under attack. What do you do? Both queens actually under attack. What do you do right here as the goat? In this position, he ignores his own queen and takes on a5. Bishop takes a5, and here's the point. Black takes the queen, but white takes back on h5. Knight takes h5 is the move. And from here, white is simply up 2 pawns in the endgame. I mean, you don't want to be down 2 pawns in the endgame versus literally the best endgame player of all time. That is not a good idea at all. Daniel here, He's down, but not out. He ignores the attack on the bishop on the e4 square, and instead takes the pawn on b2. Bishop takes b2 is the move, hitting the rook on the a1 square, and both sides now have pieces hanging. Obviously, white here cannot take the bishop on e4, as if you do that, you lose the rook. And if my math is correct, the rook is worth more than the bishop. Therefore, with that in mind, rook b1 is the move, sliding over with the rook and attacking the bishop on b2. Black, bishop g6, retreating and attacking the knight on the h5 square. The only move here that keeps the game going. If you move this bishop to, say, I don't know, d4, wherever, you lose the bishop on e4 and the game effectively on the spot. So you can't do that. Instead, bishop g6 chosen in the game. From here, rook takes b2 is the move. We have bishop takes h5, and then rook takes b7, sliding in, winning the free pawn on the b7 square. Black, bishop f3, hits the rook, also controlling some very important squares here with that bishop. White, rook c7, sliding over out of the way of the attack of the bishop. We have rook b8, threatening rook b1. Then, actually, that's almost checkmate. Almost. All right, king to e1, getting out of the way of these almost checkmating threats. King g7, bishop c3, hits the king on g7. King g6, bishop d4, a5, gaining space. King d2, rook b1, flying down with the rook, threatening potentially rook to d1 ideas, but again, it's not mate yet. From here, rook to a7, attacking the weak pawn on the a5 square. Rook b5 defends that pawn, and then c4 gains space and hits the rook on the b5 square. We have rook to f5, sliding over with that rook. Rook to a6 hits the king on g6. f6 blocks the attack, and now bishop b6 hits the pawn on the a5 square. We have rook to h5, sliding over. Rook takes a5, and now rook to h1. Here, Daniel, he knows, with white being up literally 1, 2, 3 pawns in the endgame, if you trade rooks, that is simply game over. The rooks are very good for drawing losing positions. Therefore, if he wants to have a draw in this game, at least he needs to keep those rooks on the board, at least for right now. So with that in mind, rook to h1 is the move, but Magnus, he is not letting up. Despite being in time pressure, he continues the attack. Bishop d4, sliding back with the bishop. Rook d1, king e3, bishop g4, and now rook to a6. We have rook e1, hits the king, king d2, sliding back, rook e2 check, king c3, and bishop e6. Now, a4. The pawn begins its march down the board. In the endgame, when you have the extra pawn, all you have to do is push that pawn down the board ASAP, and the opponent may be helpless to stop it, like he is potentially in this game. Black here, king to f5 is the move. a5 gains space. Rook to a2, sliding over. Now g4 check hits the king, and this right here is a very, very clever idea. The point being, the king here, no matter where it goes, down, diagonal, over, you lose the defense of the bishop. g4 check hits the king, the deflection pawn sacrifice. We have king takes, and then rook takes e6. Magnus here being up a pawn and a bishop in the endgame. Daniel, he fights on like the true legend that he is. Rook takes a5 is the move. We have bishop takes f6, h5 gaining space, rook e4 check hits the king, king to f3, and then bishop to h4. From here, rook a3 hits the king. Daniel fighting on, king d4, rook a8, keeping the rook as active as humanly possible. Then bishop g3, rook d8 hits the king, king c3, rook g8, rook f4 check, king g2, d4, rook g5, and now d5. And these pawns now are so strong. How can Daniel possibly survive this? Let's see. From here, rook g6, c5, king h3, d6. The pawn march continues. h4 hits the bishop. We have rook takes h4 check, hits the king, king g2, and now rook d4. And now, despite being down 3 pawns and the piece, Daniel, does he resign? No. He fights on until the bitter end. King to f1. Daniel playing for a win in time pressure. d7. Rook e6 slides over. d8 promotes to a queen. Daniel being down. The queen, the bishop, and the 2 pawns. And still, he does not surrender. Never surrender. King g2. Rook d5. Queen d5. Hits the king and the rook. We have king to h3. And here, Daniel, he doesn't even resign, losing the rook. Oh no, he plays on until the very bitter end, until the fat lady sings, until the final move of the game. That is simply rook to h4. White has checkmated the black king, and white has defeated Daniel Naroditsky. Wow, what a game between Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, and Daniel Naroditsky, the man, the myth, the legend himself, in this titled Tuesday Blitz game. Starting with, of course, the Alpha Zero attack with the move 5h4 and then 6h5. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please smash that like button, comment down below. What do you think of me holding my breath for 20 minutes straight? Let me know down below in the comment section below. And by the way, if you want to reach 1,000 to 2,000 plus ELO very, very fast, head over to drmikechess.com. It's my free online chess community, at least free for right now. We'll see about, I don't know, a week from now what happens. We'll see what happens then. But anyways, free for right now. I'll see you there, and I'll see you in the next video.